I am.
So-called problem is we couldn't find out a house.
No, yeah. Okay. Alrighty, so we're ready to go. I think go ahead and put the spot in these papers. You need papers? All right, so let us see if we can wrap up our first article and our discussion on God and creation and preservation and all that good stuff, huh? And this also includes a discussion on free will and the suffering of why bad things happen to good people and all that. So it's a pretty current, I should say, series of. We've got less than 50 Apostles' Creed now. When Luther taught the creed to his kids and to the students in his day, he kind of divided it up into three main subjects, which was God's creation out of nothing. He focused on that, and he talked about preservation, and then he talked about God's will. And I've done pretty much the same thing with these questions and such for us here. So, without further ado, we begin. Let's look at Genesis 8:22. Let's you find the passage or so that you want to read, and we'll go from there. Who wants to do 8:22? Go ahead, Amy.
Well, the earth is raised,
okay, so what's the key words there, you think, in that passage? Why do you suppose I picked that out? God says that what's dead on me? These things don't last very long. God says these seasons, okay, shall not cease. Okay? The seasons shall not cease. Okay? Heat and cold and so on and so forth. Now, what does that tell you? What does that tell you about God's work in the world? Okay? God's work continues. In other words, He continues. God continues to supervise, shall we say? So God continues to supervise. He is in control of what? Well, but especially when you think of seasons, when you think of heat and cold, you think of rain and snow and all that, what do you think of? Yeah. Okay. Well, God's in control of the weather. So what do we do then with global warming?
If we can, it's up to him.
Right, exactly. The human effects of our activity of humans being on the planet, frankly, when compared to the other actions that are working on the universe and so on and so forth, from the universe, are minor. Doesn't mean that they're not there. They can be there. That's right. We can, in fact, especially in cycle of evolution. We talked last talk about evolution, remember we talked about macroevolution and microevolution. Microevolution means that you can have all kinds of different kinds of cats. You can have all kinds of different kinds of dogs. You can even mix up dogs from real wide variety of breeds. Where you can take a Bengal tiger and a Himalayan tiger and breed them and come up with a different one. You can do hybrids. You can do that with plants. You can do that with all kinds of things. So microevolution can also happen all by itself. It just happens because it's in a particular area, and the pollen and whatever gets mixed around, and so you can have a different kind of plant come up, or you can have different kinds of animals. It can happen that way. So microevolution happens partly, yeah, absolutely. Macroevolution, dogs turning into cats, no. Now you're not going to have complete different species like apes, great apes, turn into or become eventually human beings. That's not going to happen. So same thing with this. We can have an effect on, let's say, a town. Okay, I'll give you Phoenix, for example. When I was a kid growing up, Yuma always, never failed, was always hotter than Phoenix. Okay? You watch the news tonight or whatever, or read the paper the next day, Phoenix was so temperature, and Yuma was 4 or 5 degrees hot. Now, today, last 20 years or so, and it's because they say Phoenix now has created its own heat island. Because of all the concrete, all the asphalt that's there, because of all the houses and streets and everything like that. And it's replaced the citrus groves, and replaced the cotton fields, and replaced the melon fields, and everything else like that, which were green and which kept it cool. Now, most of those are gone, and now, and the dairies too that were there. And now you have these houses, which the roofs reflect the heat and whatever, and the streets, of course, the black asphalt absorbs the heat and releases it at night, and the sidewalks do the same thing, and all that, and so all these huge parking lots and everything like that. Now, then you have this heat island there in the middle of the state, and so it now is anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5, even more degrees hotter than places before, like Gila Bend or Yuma, that used to be hot. So that is an effect. That's a human effect. Yes, that's a human effect. But to say that the ice caps and the poles are melting because of human activity of cars or whatever like that is just absolutely wrong. And all you have to do really to prove it wrong, it doesn't take much at all. Just look up, go to your computer, look up a volcano eruption, this last one they had down in the Caribbean, or anyone really that you want to, and you'll see that they talk about not just smoke, which by the way, smoke weighs something. Smoke, the reason you see it is because it's got stuff in it, and that stuff has weight. Particles. Yeah, the particles, and the air has weight, steam has weight. And so on and so forth. So when these volcanoes explode, not only does soot and smoke and ash and things like that, but actual dirt, debris, and they measure it in tons, right? And it's not just a few. It's not one or two. It's hundreds of tons, or sometimes thousands of tons, or more than that. And so then they also talk about cubic feet. And sometimes they talk about cubic feet that get tossed up in the air. And just from one volcano, let's say a big one, let's say one like down in Italy with Mount Vesuvius, or over in the Philippines, Mount Pinatubo, or down in Mexico, the big volcano, I can't think of the name that they have down there. And just one of these things, all right, will put more junk, ash, smoke, dirt, water, carbon dioxide. Just one of these volcanoes during the long eruption, like the one in Hawaii is still going on, been going on for years. Okay? We're putting more junk in the air than all the activity of mankind since they started making engines. Okay? Since the Industrial Revolution, which is where we really started to put a lot of, use a lot of coal engines to make steel and so on and so forth. So if you measure that from, let's say, 1820s, or even go to 1800s, okay? So 200, 1800, 2000, so 220 years. 220 years of mankind polluting the world doesn't even equal one big volcanic eruption. And we have dozens of those volcanic eruptions every year. Every year. So when you compare the sum total of all the eruptions, okay, to mankind's influence or what we put into the atmosphere, it's very, 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 very minuscule. Minuscule, yeah, that's a good word for it. Genesis 50. Go ahead.
So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and showed kindness to them.
Okay. I will provide. Okay. Again, God provides. Okay. I will provide. So when Jacob was faced with going into a foreign land, even though his son Joseph was the prime minister, God assured him, don't worry about it. And when they left in Exodus 400 years later, God told Moses, do not listen to the Lord, walk with you. I'll make sure that everything goes okay. Job 12.
It is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind.
Okay, every living thing. And all mankind, every person. I have said this before. You know, you've heard me say this. No, and this now, I say it about people, okay? No person, no human being comes into existence without God's permission. No human being leaves this earth without God's permission. It says so right there. Now, this also includes what? According to that verse, it also includes plants and animals. That's right. Imagine that. Imagine the control. Imagine the control that God has. You've seen, I'm sure, in aquariums or on documentaries, movie shows, whatever. I'm sure you've seen salmon spawning or whatever. And my goodness, the eggs, why the what? Thousands, right? Millions, yeah. And God is in control of every single one of those. You've seen the turtles, right? And hundreds, because they all kind of hatch at once. Sea turtles bury their eggs, on the sand in Florida or on the Caribbean someplace or in Texas. And then they all start popping up out, and there's hundreds and hundreds, thousands of them going into the water, all right? And God decides which one survives. Only 1 out of 10 will survive. The rest of them will get eaten or die in some other way. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of the crabs. There's an island in the Pacific where the crabs do the same thing. They travel over land and bury their eggs and then go back in the water and they attach. And they start coming over the whole time. The whole island is turned away. It's just miraculous. Whoa! God has control of every single thing. Every tumbleweed that sprouts in your yard is only by God's permission. Every dandelion that you whack out of your garden is only by God's permission. Do you think this means anything else, folks? Do we sometimes, come on, let's admit it, we're believers, even us good believers, even us good Bible believers, I think we get, sometimes we're just jaded. things that way. When we see all of these tons of seeds blowing in the air, we don't think of God choosing which one sprouts, which one gets eaten by birds, and which one gets trampled into concrete and never does anything. Okay? We don't, come on. I don't, not every time. But we need to once in a while stop. We need to stop and understand what this verse means. Every living thing is under the control of God. There is no computer in the world that can even come close to what our brains can control. Now, apply that to the whole universe. If there is life on Mars, okay, God is controlling it. If there's life on a planet going around Alpha Centauri, God is controlling it. If there's life on a galaxy that we just saw yesterday, that so many light years away just came into our view, and there's a planet somewhere in there where it was surrounding a star, and there's life on that planet, God is controlling. Okay. We need to, once in a while, I think it's good for us, to just stand back every now and then and go, wow. I mean, really, wow. That's just, it really is, it's like thinking of eternity. It's like thinking of eternity in the past and the future. It's like thinking of heaven where there is no time. Try contemplating that sometimes. It'll give you heaven, right? And so same with this here. Psalm 91. Did you know? Richard had it. No? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. For he will give his angels time concerning you, to guard you in all your ways.
No plague will come near your tent. Right? Now, we know plenty of people. We know plenty of biblical people. We know, let's put it this way. There are plenty of examples in the Bible of people who are probably believers, or even believers. Let's take Job, for example. Okay? Job's a believer. We know that. It's called the hero of faith in the Bible. What happened to Job? Well, I don't know if you want to call it a plague or not, but certainly it wasn't as bad as a plague. It sounds to me, when they describe it, when Job describes, the book of Job describes how he was ill, it sounds to me like the Black Plague. It sounds to me like bubonic plague. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like he's got carbuncles all over it. All right? How can the psalmist then say this? That no plague will come near your tent. Why? Well, because all these things that are said this way have to do, of course, with God and His control. So no plague, and etc. and so forth, according to God's will. It's like when Jesus said. Jesus says, "Ask whatever you want in my name, and I will give it." Well, there's a bit of a caveat there. There's a bit. I wouldn't call it an exception. Certainly wouldn't call it a contradiction. But there's a bit of a asterisk, shall we say, according to my will. If I know it's not good for you, no plague will come near your tent has more to do with just your human earthly existence. It has to do with your existence as a child of God, which includes getting to heaven. So that has to always be understood when we hear verses like this. Right? Next verse, Psalm 145. Go ahead, James.
The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due time. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing.
Again, I will give you food in your time. In other words, when it's good for you, when it's best for you. And again, we hear the same thing. Every living thing. Bacteria are alive. They did. They were smarter than writers. They thought, I saw the thing, you know, take it off. How I was going to lie. Because they didn't know why, obviously. But there's one reason why some scientists don't consider them alive. I can't remember what it is. But they're some kind of life, you know, because like I said, they reproduce. But in any case, bacteria, and when one cell bacteria are alive, God is in control of them. God is in control of them. That's pretty infinitesimal. The amoebas floating around in the canal water, from the canal water to elephants and blue whales.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. That's kind of like the old word. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth.
And why do we inherit the earth? Well, we inherit the earth because the earth belongs to us. God created it for us. God did not create the earth for the penguins. God created the penguins for us. God did not create the earth for the polar bears. God created the polar bears for us. Without the polar bears, a lot of the Eskimo tribes, I guess you would use that word, Native Americans of the Arctic area, would not survive. They need the polar bears to survive. Frankly, I don't think they should be living where it's so cold anyway. You know, just they like it. It's all what you like. It is quite amazing when you consider this. We have really, we inherit the earth, and there again, you know, God talks about it as a key thing. Okay, next passage, Matthew 10.
We have that.
Go ahead.
Are not two sparrows sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? But that very hairs on your head are all numbered.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about this passage too. The hairs on your head are numbered. What does that mean? That does not mean, clearly, does not mean simply that God knows how many hairs on your head. It means God has numbered each individual hair with its own individual number. That's what it means. The Greek is very clear here. Think about that for a second. It's one thing to say, well, God knows I have 10,462 hairs. It's another thing to say God has given each and every one of those 10,462 hairs a particular number. And it also means God determines when it comes in and when it falls out. Now multiply that times the 7 billion people on the planet, and there again. I mean, not only, you know, he's not just controlling the crabs and the sea otters and starfish and everything else, but also every human being, and also every cell in their body and every hair on their head. I mean, it just gets to the point where you're just totally you're without any words. There are no words to really express this amount of provision, this amount of providence. Okay, and you just can't even come close to it. Hebrews 1:3. Go ahead.
The radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature and all things by the word of God. Okay, now we're just talking about living things. Now we're talking about old things.
Okay, but now we can include the rocks. Okay, we can include the dirt, we can include the air, we can include, anything and everything you wanna, mention. Again, every atom of the entire universe. That's what the Bible teaches, folks, and whether we can understand it or not. 1 Peter 5. Go ahead, Jamie. There you go. So, the conclusion, God cares for us, and therefore, if we're going to make any difference in the world, if we're going to make any changes in the world, if we ourselves, us as individuals, are going to make any kind of effect on the world beyond the little later effects that we have, we're going to have to ask God. We're going to have to go to Him. Which is the whole point, isn't it, of prayer. This is what we talked about the other day on Sunday. We talked about prayer, and we said, yes, God can make, I like to put this way in my prayers, and put it on, but I have kind of got to the point, one of the things that I have which is, if you can make that which is not, and you can make that which is not to be. In other words, I'm saying God can actually change the past. Now, I don't want to get too deep here. I don't want to get too philosophical here. But I will add one thought, and please don't faint. Okay? If you ask God to change what has happened already, which He is capable of doing, then you will not know that has happened. So, if you say to me, Pastor, I asked God to change history in such and such a way, and He didn't answer me, my answer to you is, maybe He did, and you just don't know. Because if God changes the past, okay, let's say for example, just take an example. Let's say you've got a relative, friend, child, parent, whatever, and they're traveling through the Rocky Mountains in a blizzard hit. And it's 1:30 in the afternoon, and you see that on the news. And at 1:31, your relative skids off of a road in the Rockies and goes into a chasm and dies instantly. But at 1:32, having seen the weather report from Colorado, you pray to God very fervently, and you say, God, protect my relative, whatever, and then you maybe add whatever has been can be different, you can make it so, and whatever is not so, you can make it to happen. And you go about your business. Therefore, our later may simply and of course, therefore, you are not. I know that's what it is. A lot of people these are the capabilities of God, who can make things that are not, and make things that are not, are. Now, I don't know how far we want to test this. We want to go back in time and, test it to see, and it wouldn't do any good, because then all the history books would be changed immediately anyway. If we turn Hitler into a committed confessional Lutheran, okay, wouldn't harm a fly, then that's what our experience is going to be. Right? And all those millions of people who died in the Second World War are alive, and they all came home and produced children. And all of a sudden we got 10 billion people instead of 7. But we're not going to remember that we won 10-7. See? All right. I just wanted to throw that out there because, again, we even as good believers, we tend to kind of limit ourselves. And as Jesus said, you receive not because you ask not. Okay? So how do we know that our lives could not be a lot different depending on what we ask for? On the other hand, you also have to consider the wisdom of God. And that He's controlling the amoebas and, the hairs and all this other kind of stuff. So He obviously knows when it is the best time for anyone or anything to be created or to leave the world. Right? Right. I mean, that's also true. So, your request, I'm going to guess, 99 times out of 100, if you do say, Lord, make something that has happened not to happen, and make something that hasn't happened to happen, 99 times out of 100, it's going to be, God is going to basically say, no, my way is better. Sorry. You think that's going to be better for you, but in the end, it's not. So I'm not going to do it. Yeah.
I was having a discussion with the lady the other day, and she's worried about things that are happening and stuff. And I said, remember, God is in control. She said, yes, the devil's doing it. I said, but God, Mama, the devil's doing it. And then she said, she was ready to go all to her chances. And I said, yes, but I always say, God is holding my hand. And she goes, no, the church told me I could not get her to understand that He is there. You may not know it, but He gets you through it.
It's hard. I mean, think about it. What we just talked about here in the last 25 minutes, it is hard enough for us to really consider even, or to focus on this amount of control that God has over every atom and every molecule in the entire huge. We know, we have at least an idea of how big the universe is now. Much better than people did 1,000 years ago. So if that's hard for us, imagine how hard it is for an unbeliever. Wow. I do not suggest this kind of topic as the first thing you talk to somebody about. You want to lead them to Jesus. Okay? This is one of those things that St. Paul would call meat as opposed to milk. Okay? Definitely. Well, let's look at the questions here. How does God preserve the universe? In other words, what does God use? What instrumentality does God use to control the universe? Yeah. How does God control the universe? By His exercising His will. And that's a very important concept. It may seem like a stupid question. I understand that, people looking at that might say, well, that's kind of a weird question. How does God do it? We're not debating whether God does it or not. We see that in the Scriptures. But we need to remember that it is done according to His will, and His will is perfect. It is holy and perfect. You cannot get any better. Okay? So by His will, or according to His will, however you want to put that. How do we know He is doing this work? How do we know that He is preserving the universe by His will? Well, yeah, I guess that we're still here. The universe is still here. That's how we know it. Okay? We know it because the world hasn't come to an end yet. Okay? And as soon as God lifts His hand, as we call it, as soon as God lifts His hand for one split second, then every disaster movie you've ever seen and it happens all at once. Why is God doing this work? Improve on that. Why is God preserving the universe according to His will in the way that He is? That He's doing what He's doing? Because He wants to. Well, yeah, you can't argue that. Again, a little more specific. Well, okay, I'll go along with that because He loves every soul.
I don't think you prevent chaos.
Well, okay, but who benefits from that? Who's we? The believers. Okay. So whatever happens in this world, whatever happens in this universe, to a grain of sand on the beach, or to the President of the United States, or to a guppy, or to an elephant, whatever happens, how many hairs are in your sink? Okay, literally. Whatever happens in this universe happens for one reason, and one reason only. One reason and one reason only. So that you, or so that the believer, that you individually, get to heaven. Okay? So therefore, this is why when we talk about evil, we talk about evil in two ways. We talk about what I call evil with a big E and evil with a little e. Evil with a little e is a book related. Evil with a little e is my company went bankrupt and I'm out of the town. Evil with a little e is I got cancer. Evil with a little e is I got run off the road by an 18-wheeler in Spanish. Those are all little e. Big E evils, there's only one. You go to hell. That's the only big E evil there is. All the rest of the world in comparison to eternal separation from God. Okay? So that's why God does His work. So the most possible number of people who could possibly get to heaven do indeed. That means, of course, all those who see the book of life, who were chosen before the first Adam came into existence. So everything that God did from that, we say time, but there was no time. But anyway, once He put together the book of life and listed the people who will be in heaven in the book of life, and then after that, sometime after that, again, there's no time, but anyway, He said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and so on and so forth, including saying, "Let there be light." Starting with "Let there be light," all the way to Gabriel's trumpet, it is done. In the book of Revelation, everything that is done for that one reason and one reason only. As one of my professors used to say, to get your solid butt into therapy. So that's always our answer. And finally, folks, when people say, why does this happen to me? Or why does this happen to a country? Or why does this happen to this? Or anytime anybody asks, why does this happen, whatever this happens to be? You know, it could be disastrous or it could be minor inconvenience, whatever. Then whatever other answer you might come up with, and you can come up with others, the final answer is that answer. So that the most possible number of people who could possibly get to heaven do indeed get to heaven. That's it. And of course, when you say that, a lot of people will say, yeah, that's pie in the sky. That doesn't help me now. you know? And that's like somebody told me one time, and I was young in my ministry, early in my ministry, and I used the old ploy about, well, yeah, but this member has, you know, tuberculosis or whatever, and the guy yelled at me, the partner yelled at me, and he said, "Catch it doesn't do me any good if somebody else is suffering worse than I am." You know, when you're young and inexperienced, and you go on the easy way. And that's right. And, you know, if you're suffering, you're going to bust up a leg, and you take a walk. It's not real helpful that the person down the street has a busted arm. What does the difference does that make to you? Right? So, or maybe two busted arms and a busted leg, and so on and so forth. So, okay. Anyway, next question. What kinds of actions does God cause or allow in doing His work? That's kind of a trick question. And the answer is real simple. Anything and everything, yeah. Yeah, I kind of put it out there so because I kind of wanted, looking for maybe a response like, well, you know, he stops a storm, let's say, from hitting such and such a place, or moves a tornado 12 miles away, or you know, and those things are probably true. I mean, especially when you look at some of those tornado things, you know, and you've seen pictures. You've seen pictures of a subdivision, right? Like a cul-de-sac, and like 4 or 5 of the houses are flattened, and there's one house standing hasn't got so much as a single roof. You got to look at that. You got to go, whoa! And you know, and if I was living in that perfectly preserved house, I'd step out and go, well, there, but for the grace of God goes me, you know, or you know, all kinds of things like that. You know, I think of my dad. I think of my dad in 19 times. 19 times in 3.5 years, he went over the side. In Poland's landing on the islands in the Pacific during World War II. 19 times. Over the side, down the nets, into the boat, to the beach. And granted, some of them, there was nobody at the beach. But under other times, you know, the boats were flying fast and furious, and he'd be in the boat, you know, and a guy on one side and a guy on the other side both got it, and went into the water and never came up again, and you know, he got to see Tokyo. These are the kinds of things, folks, you know, the guys who hit Normandy, you know, and one guy out of a whole platoon doesn't get scratched. The rest of the platoon is totally wiped out. You know, it's just, these are the kinds of things you gotta say. This is God's work. It has to be. George Washington had I don't know how many horses shot out from underneath him. He had a number of holes in his coat during the Revolutionary War, and in some cases they said the holes in his coat were miraculous because there was no way you could get a hole in his coat. Like it wasn't like the wind was blowing on him, but there's a hole in his coat, but there's no hole in his shirt. And that's attested to. That's historical testament to those things. And the fact he survived, even being out front sometimes with his troops, was purely miracle. Purely miracle. Had to be miracle. God couldn't be any other reason. Or allowance of God. That's what we put that on. All right. What roles do humans play in this process? What role do humans play in this process, in God controlling the world? Well, in a sense, you could say that, but that's not true. I mean, look at all the times in history that God used human beings. George Washington is a perfect example. We call him, historians call him the indispensable man. If you take that one man out of the equation, we're still a colony of Britain. In my opinion, that's probably better than that's not here and there. But look at again Joseph in Egypt. Now, did God have to use Joseph in Egypt? No. Did God use Joseph in Egypt? Yes. So, Does God have to use humans? No, he doesn't. Does God use humans? Yes. He does use humans. He uses us to accomplish this work.
There's another one that I said, that's right, what made the one through us and through you. Sometimes through us. Sometimes even through the sin. I mean, you know, the element is the king. What's the sin for? But God used it to bring about the solution, and then used the solution to occur through things in his spiritual kingdom. But there's another way that we have to go in how God preserves and what's in here, which puts together the truth. One is the instruments, but the other is the outcome of it. Prayer can change the way things work out. And again, remember, either in the future or in the past. Well, the difference is, if it's in the past, we don't know it's not. We don't think of it as being what we're supposed to do.
How has God made this work on our part possible? So we are instruments. Well, first of all, let's answer the prayer one first. Okay. So prayer, because we're believers, because He has made us believers. Because prayer is not accepted by God by unbelief. Okay. So in order for prayer to have any effect on what goes on in the world, we have to be believers. And so God's made us believers. The other way is what? If He's going to use us as instruments, what else does He have to do with us? Well, not necessarily. That He might, that's possible. He has to give us the abilities, doesn't He? Those have to come from God. I have lousy math ability. I have good ability for dates and names and places in history. So God's not going to put me on a math team for NASA to help control the market. That's in the trash, obviously.
Well, I'm going to speak in such a way that it can just be difficult with the result, make it possible for you to preach and teach this work. We are constantly able to Holy Spirit to spread the gospel. We don't convert anyone, but we can be true. We can be instruments of conversion. And talking to people about our Savior, and talking to people about our faith, and talking to people about our church, and talking to people about the Bible, etc. We can be the kind of people or the instruments that God uses to bring others to faith.
And that can be, even if we're bedridden or whatever, even if we're, not active, older we get, whatever, and so on and so forth. I used to tell Wally Smith, I used to tell her, she would get upset, I don't want to get to church, or I'm not able to come to Ladies Guild, or I'm not able to do this and do that. And I said, well, what do you spend your time doing? And she says, praying. And I said, who do you pray for? She said, well, I pray for you, I pray for the church, I pray for all kinds of individual members of the church. There you go. That's probably doing as much good or more good maybe than anything else. Okay? So yeah, absolutely. Does God need our participation in His work of preservation? You already answered that. No. Why or why not? Again, because God can get His will done without it. Now, just as we've said about our lives, and how God wants us to get to heaven and straight line is the best way to go, but He allows us to make all kinds of moves. The same is true of His own will. God just wants these believers to get that. Well, but because, well, let's move over here and take a little more work than this one over here as well. We need to kind of change the history a little bit, so we're practicing on it. It doesn't mean us. Sometimes he works not so much through us as in spite of us. All right? Yeah. I had this kind of other leaders in our church all the time about the divine call. My call to be your pastor is a divine call. I'm chosen by God to be called to not be I'm not a good one. But then they go on to say that then the district presidents or the seminary professors or whatever are instruments of God's will to carry out that, to get a person in the place where God wants them. I like to remind them, God sometimes works through you to get a guy here. That's true. But God sometimes works in spite of you. And you send a guy to Appleton, God really wants them to go to Fond du Lac. He'll finally get to Fond du Lac at some point. God can, of course, change the whole situation so that the DP, makes the guy go to Fond du Lac in the first place, but not necessarily. I found out many years after my call day, the day that they announced the placements for the graduates, I found out many years later that my original placement was to be in La Mesa, California, which is a suburb of San Diego. That was my original placement. But I had gotten into a leader of the college in Rome, and it was really decided at the last minute, and I made it to Wisconsin. I think they said he didn't even snow. I think that's the phrase. They didn't want to send me back to San Diego when I was at the circle. They decided to send me to the bottom of the continent. I didn't get it. I didn't find a reason to come to it. I think everything is about being 2 days and out there. First paycheck I got, very first paycheck I got, meanwhile, the Mesa is a big congregation, very rich, had a school and home and so on and so forth. But I didn't find that out for many years later. And then God worked around the corner and this and that, and finally got me to El Paso, and then from El Paso and Las Cruces, and then finally here and so on and so forth. I like to always say, it's in God's hands. That God gives us, and sometimes God says, okay, you want to do it that way? Fine. I'm going to let you do it. I'll get my way done a different way. I'll still get my way done, but I'll get it done a different way. And I think he does that in order to teach us all lessons, in order to say, well, I can work it in different ways. God has a lot of options, and he can make things work as he sees fit. So, does he need our participation? No, he doesn't. Does he use it? Yes, he does. And he doesn't need it because he's got lots of ways to get his will done. Why do we thank him for this participation in our preservation? We would cease to exist as fast as the astronaut who keeps his face and brings his shield smashing. They don't shadows and movement. He dies instantly. That's pretty much we're kind of cocooned in our time. And he decides to withdraw his grace and mercy from us. And we'll finish with that. What does God's preservation of the universe tell us about it? I like to say, some people will have to say the first answer there is love, and that's fine. I don't disagree with that. If you want to put that name for a bench, that's fine. Be on us and again, believer, and he does everything to get the believers in heaven. I don't know what the control is. just the power, brain power alone, just the thinking alone of controlling every living and non-living thing in the entire universe, is seconds by seconds, nanoseconds by nanoseconds. The power to do that, the ability to do that is, like I say, mind-numbing. It's just beyond all of our recognition. We can't even think about it. Well, yeah, and that's why I say, I don't mind which you put first, but I would put them both in, because that's good. Questions on lesson 15? All right, we're doing pretty good. We might get 2 out of 3 this time. Lesson 16, Apostles' Creed, first article, part 3. This is the third part of God's preservation, creation and preservation. The sufficiency of His governing of the universe. Okay? Genesis 1:28. Chapter 1, verse 28. Anybody? Yes, go ahead, Dean.
God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule to the fish of the sea and over the birds and the sky and over every living thing that moves in the earth.
Okay, so who's God talking to here? Just shout it out. Yeah, he's talking to Adam and Eve, and actually he's talking to Adam, but that's okay. You can throw Eve in there, no, not a problem. So to humans. Okay, so he's talking to humans or mankind or however you want to put it, Adam and Eve, whatever, and he's saying what? He's saying, anybody? He's in control, but how about the human? Let's say, okay, we already did that one, now we're moving on to the next level. He's created, God's in control of everything, now He's created human beings, now what? Okay, we are stewards. Okay? And what do we do as stewards? Because at least two. As stewards, we are to one, because we're talking about this kind of simple world. Right? Or this way, fill the earth. Right? Fill the earth. I'll tell you right now. But the Hebrew here, when it says fill the earth, it means fall to overflow. And the population growth, zero population growth people always they really need to take a trip, go out to Lawrenceburg, New Mexico, and drive from Lawrenceburg, New Mexico to Silver State. And as they go along that road, look to the right, look to the left, look behind them in the rearview mirror, and look ahead of them as far as they could see. You will not see one single solitary stick, except for a couple of cattle fences. You will not see a house. You will not see a tree. You will not see a teepee. You will not see anything for more miles than you can think of. Or go another direction. Go southward to Hootie, dirt and rocks. Or go out towards Denver. or any direction you want. Or when you get to Deming, then take that road towards the city. Or take that road through my favorite town in Mexico, Nut. You could take the entire metropolitan area of New York or Los Angeles and pop it down in the middle of it. 10 places in Mexico you can take them, and it would just disappear. It would just be like a bird in a pond. Texas. So, we're to fill the earth, and the Bible says, fill means fill. Fill means to overflow. Okay? Which, of course, we have maybe because close to do it. And the second one is stewardship. Okay, and rule and what? What's the other term? Subdue. Now, this word subdue, very interesting word in Hebrew. Okay? In the Hebrew, the word subdue means more than just get it under your control. It literally means use it up. Use it all. God is saying here, use everything I have given to you. Every mountain, every stream, every gold nugget, every piece of diamond, every chunk of coal, every fish, every moose, every elk, every deer, every cat, every dog, everything. Everything. Use it up until there ain't no more. Now, combine that with what he said that we listened to last time about the seasons never stopping, and his total control of the weather, and his total control of the animals, and his total control of everything else. When you combine those two things together, it's really a statement of faith. God is really saying to Adam and Eve, go ahead, use as much as you can find. It'll be okay. I'll make sure you never run out. That's what God is saying. That is exactly what that verse is saying, folks. Don't be afraid. Go ahead, drill oil any place you want to. Build dams anywhere you want to. Do whatever you can. Of course, be a good steward. Nobody's saying, you see these piles of buffalo killed back in the last 2 centuries ago, which was not really had anything to do with the buffalo. It had to do with wiping out the Indians, right? Which was murder, really. That's not an ecological problem. That the railroads hired buffalo hunters to massacre millions and millions and millions of buffaloes and pile their heads a mountain, 3 stories high. That's not a problem. That has nothing to do with conservatorship, has nothing to do with ecology, has nothing to do with saving the planet, has nothing to do with anything. That has to do with a genocide against the American Native Americans. That's what that has to do. Okay? So I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. That's just plain stupid. That's not good stewardship. Good stewardship is you don't catch all the fish and eat all the fish. Why? Well, then there's no more. They can't make any more fish. Okay? If you eat all the salmon, there ain't going to be any more salmon. All right. So God is not saying that. He's not saying What he is saying is use as much as you possibly can in good stewardship, and I'll see to it that you don't run out until it gets to be judgment day, then of course you don't need it anymore. But use what you want, use what you need. Okay? Don't be greedy. Okay, don't be greedy. Don't take more than you need. But click the sheets. Don't worry about it. The world is not going to turn against you. The world is not going to be destroyed by mankind. I got news for you. God says in many places in the Bible, I'm the one who's going to destroy the world. Nobody else. Sorry, nobody else. I used to tell that to my friends back in the 60s and 70s when everybody was scared that the Russians and the Americans were going to trade nuclear missiles. Okay? Everybody was scared about it. And you know, it was one thing when they had bombs. When it was planes, you know, we shoot them down. They'll never get there. But then these ICBMs come about, and I was in the Air Force ROTC program, and we learned all about the missile things, and we didn't take it in those systems at all. It was not zero, blah, blah. Okay? And so, I mean, these things could get through. I mean, there was nothing to stop them, nothing. All somebody had to do was hit that button, and poof, they were all gone. And so I used to tell people at the time, I said, guys, the Bible says very clearly, God says, I will destroy. Khrushchev is not going to destroy the world. Kennedy's not going to destroy the world. Johnson, Nixon, those guys are not going to destroy it. You know, Reagan is not going to destroy the world. You can't. That's what it says. That's not going to happen. That's not going to destroy the world. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about God says, quit worrying so much about this stuff. If you're going to worry about something, fine. Worry about being good stewards, okay, fine. But beyond that, don't worry about it. Okay. 1 Chronicles 29. Go ahead.
Both riches and honor come for you, and you rule over, and in your hands is power and might, and it lies in your hand to make great and to strengthen everyone. Now therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name.
All right. What does this tell us? Who is in control of riches and poverty? God. And so who makes people poor? God. Who makes people rich? God. Okay. God is in control. Okay. I was just watching a documentary the other day. How many people had the idea for the incandescent light bulb? Not just Edison and Tesla. There were another dozen people. There was another guy who had, up to that time I never heard about, and I can't think of his name right now, but he was over in Europe. And Edison bought this guy's patent. Now, I never heard of it. It was not in my school book. And there were other people, there were a dozen people at the time working on the incandescent light bulb. And I remember reading a story once, and I don't know if it's true as a Reader's Digest, about Tesla, for example, getting to the patent office like 10 minutes after that. I don't know if that's true, but it's a common story. In other words, of all those dozens of people that are working on the incandescent light bulb, God decided, for whatever reason, that Edison would be the one to get the credit. Now, you can take that story, you can run with it with a gazillion other examples. Okay? I know I've read about Bill Gates, how other people were talking about doing a Windows-type system, or how he stole it from the Apple people, Steve Jobs and Wozniak, which is probably true. But there again, a lot of people are working on the product. A lot of people. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember when, before Windows. I remember before Windows, the MS-DOS system. And I remember how I hated using them. And you had to literally memorize the commands. That's how my son, my middle son, youngest son, taught himself to read. We were so frustrated with the computer, it was on a little rolling table. We took the rolling table, we rolled it into his bedroom, because it was the only spot we had in the house for it. We rolled it into his bedroom. He was, I think, 3 at the time. We rolled it into his bedroom. We put it up against the wall. I was sick with it. My wife was sick with it. We weren't going to mess with it anymore. And we had took the manuals, and even the DOS manual was about that thick, with the ring binders, and we put it in there, and we ignored it. And a couple months later, I'm saying goodnight to Matthew, and I open the door, and here he is sitting at the computer. And he said, no, I think the first time I saw him, he was sitting on the bed with the MS-DOS manual open, and he was reading it like this. Laying down, he was reading it like this. I said, you could read that? Mm-hmm. And then it was maybe a month later, he's taking the floppies, floppies in, and put one in, take one out, put another one in, take another one in, take one out, little accordion down for a while. And he memorized all the commands. So he didn't have to look at them anymore. Then we started using him. Hey, help me do. And then a couple of years after that, I think it was a couple of years after that, a friend of mine got an Apple over on the other side of town and showed me. And the first time I tried using a mouse and all that, and I couldn't make it work. I couldn't do it. I said, I'll never get used to that. You know, it's the coming of age. Oh, but folks, I mean, it is God who picks these people. You know, there were a lot of people working on repeating arms. Samuel Colt wasn't by any means the first. There were a lot of other guys working on it. He became rich. Winchester, same way. A lot of guys working on that type of weapon. One of them was named Christopher Spencer. Henry's another one, that's right. And Henry made out okay. I mean, he didn't go to the poorhouse or anything, but Winchester's the one who got the government contract, and Winchester's the one who made the money. So, folks, it's not the president or the Congress that's in charge of rich and poor. It's God. Right? What did Jesus say about the poor? Remember? You shall always have them. There will always be poor people. You know, Lenin, Marx, Stalin, all these guys trying to let's get rid of the poor. Let's make sure nobody's poor. Let's make sure everybody has equal with everybody else. Never happens. Never does happen, never can happen. And who's in charge of it? Again, you know, should we pray that billionaires, you know, whether it's Trump or whether it's Gates or whether it's, you know, somebody else or this guy that runs Amazon, the richest man in the world now, Bezos, okay? Should we pray that they are destroyed and wiped out or whatever? No. We thank God for these people. Good grief. Bill and Melinda Gates give literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year to hospitals and research and all kinds of other things. Now, I don't think the world would really get along as well as it does without the contributions from a lot of these people. You know, think about it. Have you ever sat in a old library in your hometown sometime? They were all Carnegie Library, every single one. I'm sure I love that old Carnegie. And, you know, any town you went to in the Midwest, any town you went to, as a matter of fact, Southwest California, Texas, Florida, doesn't matter where you went, any town you went to, I don't know how small it was. Could be 4,000, 5,000 people. There would be a Carnegie Library. How many people got their start in business and got their start in the world by sitting in a Carnegie Library or going through the old Dewey Decimal System, finding a book to read and become an expert in? God chooses that, folks. So yeah, let's not hate the rich, you know, and let's not feel like we can get rid of all the poor. We can make sure that nobody's ever poor again. That's never going to happen. Proverbs 16.
The mind of man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps.
Yeah. So, there's another way of saying it. Man plans, God does. The plans, how did Robbie Burns put it, huh? Old Robbie Burns, who talked about the wee little mousie. Many of the plans of mice and men go astray. Yes. This is so true. Okay. Next passage, Habakkuk 3.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food,
nor the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls. Yet I will exalt in the Lord, I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds feet, and made me walk on my high places. So, fire director on my spring day. So, this guy is saying what? If the fields are bare, if the cupboard is bare, if the stomach is empty, if the well comes dry, everything else, even in bad times, God is still preserving us, God is still working, and I will still give him glory. Now that's a real test, my friend. That's a test. When you have to go back to the bean pot. Okay, you have to go back to the bean pot. Well, lady, mom would, put a couple pounds of fennel beans on the stove on Monday, and we would eat beans on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. We might have beans and hot dogs, or beans and bread, or beans and tortillas, or sometimes just beans. But we would eat beans 4 or 5 days a week. And that's surrounded by cattle. Can we go out and butcher one, the old man, But yeah, even in bad times, it seems like to me, whenever our family went through bad times, whenever we went back to the bean pot, and we did that 3 or 4 or 5 times in my childhood before we kind of hit a ditch. But every time we did, the old man made sure, more at that time than the other time, he made sure to make it to church. Even when we lived out in White Wing, past Dayton, and we have to drive past Dayton, past Horn, past Mohawk Mountain, past Welton, past Telegraph Pass, into Yuma. Okay. If you go past Dayton, you'll see it's a 75-mile pattern. So 75 miles from Dayton to Yuma. And the Lutheran church that we went to was only a mile from the border of California. So 74 miles. And then it was 30 miles from that mile mark right there out to the ranch in the Hacienda Valley. Excuse me, Hacienda Valley. And it took us about 3 hours on Highway 8. So, but when we were going through tough times is when we made it every Sunday. I think that's what the proverb is talking about. Habakkuk. John 3:27.
John answered and said, a man can receive nothing unless it is given him from heaven.
There you go, folks. They can't say it better than that. Man can receive nothing unless it is given by God in heaven. Unless God decides we don't take another breath. Unless God allows our heart does not beat one more time. Wow. Again, it's like what we talked about in the first lesson. This amount of control, the amount of minute detail that God is involved in goes way beyond our understanding. Romans 8:28 and 29. Go ahead, Carolyn.
And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. Yeah, again, that's the point. That Jesus is the first to heaven in a symbolic sense, even though Abel made it there before him in a way, humanly speaking. But Jesus is called the firstborn for that reason, because in all those who believe in him, that's how they get there, including Abel. So in that sense, even though Abel dies and goes to heaven long before Jesus lives as in a human body, yet Jesus is first and Abel is second. In that sense. That Abel was only in heaven because he believed in the Messiah. Galatians 5:13. For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh. to serve one another.
Okay, so while we're here, what do we do? We serve one another. Okay? We don't abuse the privilege that God has given us. God has given us life. God has given us forgiveness in Jesus. God has given us faith so we go to heaven. God has given us all these things. We don't abuse the privilege and act so totally for ourselves and against His will. 1 Timothy 4.
For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with gratitude, for it is sanctified by means of the Word of God and prayer.
Okay, so we don't have to obey dietary rules. Very clear right there. Seventh-day Adventists are dead wrong. We can eat all the ham we want. We have all the bacon and sausage we feel like. Okay? Now, of course, like with the stewardship, we don't overdo it. If we do, they may have consequences like high cholesterol and stuff like that, and corroded arteries and so on and so forth. But there's no reason we can't eat those things. We want to eat monkey brain, we can eat monkey brain. It's fine for you, not for me, thank you, I'll pass. And we want to eat fried ants, you can eat fried ants. And ground up grasshoppers, that's fine. Cockroach milk, that's good, no problem. Pick and choose whatever you want. God said everything that created is good. Nothing bad. Nothing forbidden. No, not at all. James 1:17. Go ahead, Gerald.
Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above,
There you go.
coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation nor shifting shadow.
There you go. There it is, right there. Everything. And again, I can tell you that the Greek word there is very clear. Everything means everything. Including COVID-19. Yeah. Okay. Just like we heard in Romans. All things. Panta, the Greek word, which means everything you can possibly do. All things work out for good. I know that's hard. God doesn't say anywhere that that's easy. He doesn't. I don't know of a single passage where God says it's easy to put up with sickness and illness and death and so on and so forth. I don't know anywhere where He says that. He doesn't say. Anywhere that I know. So it's not as this that's like calling off the law, blah, 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 Christians should never cry or whatever. No. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. Okay? The point is that the things that make us cry, the things that make us sad, the things that make us depressed or unhappy or whatever, are also as good for us as the things that make us happy and glad and skipping around and warm and pleasant. That's the point. It's just as good for, if it happens, God has caused or allowed it to happen, and therefore it is by definition, because the definition of God is good, so by definition, that is good. Now, granted, again, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to see that. Sometimes you see that, it's like a little war or something, or, a tsunami Christmas Day and afterwards, with 400,000 people. It makes you scratch your head. That's true. And again, there's not a passage in the Bible that says you shouldn't do that, or it's bad for you to do that. No, I don't think so. You should consider that. No. God can kill 200,000 people in one day. Better pay attention to what He tells you. Maybe I should get the truth next week. All right. We got a whole 3 minutes to answer about 10 questions real quick. How complete and detailed is God's governance of the universe? Well, I think we kind of went over that already, so we can say total and absolute. Why does anyone exist? Now here, I want you to think of not just believers. We know why believers exist. They get to heaven. And now, why does anyone, and we're talking about people here, we're not talking about, porcupines. So, why does any person exist? Yes, ma'am.
Because God's goal is that everyone will be done.
That's the first reason, yeah.
Even the unbelievers.
That he wants that.
He wants that.
Yes, he wants that, even though they're not going to happen. Yes, ma'am.
But by somebody, non-believer, somebody could become a believer.
True. But even beyond that, the purpose of human existence. Let's go back before the fall. So before the fall, okay, Adam and Eve were created to go to heaven, but that was kind of already, that was a gimmick. They were perfect. So before the fall then, why did God create Adam and Eve to begin with? What was their duty before they needed to have faith in the coming Messiah? Mm-hmm. You think that's it? God just created us to work? I think if that were true, there would be babies in heaven, and there are.
Well, to interact with it, I mean, it's just kind of.
How, okay, you're on the right track. Interact with him how? And you don't need the gospel before the fall. Ah, there you go. Put those two together. Interact with him, worship him. Worship and pray. Give glory to God. Now, I've said this to some people over the years that they have gotten quite incensed. They have said, well, that's very selfish of him. God created human beings just so he could get a praise from them. Attaboy, a little pat on the back, huh? Oh, I don't put it that way. But yeah. Why should we not have a problem with that? People try, whenever I tell that to somebody who's kind of on the borderline, and I say, well, why are we here? And I say, to praise and honor God. Give him honor, praise, glory, whatever. And then sometimes they come back and go, oh, I'm selfish. My answer to that is, yeah, you're right, it is selfish. But, so what? He's God. If God wants to create us for no other reason than just to have us around, to look at us and to have us say, hey, thanks God for being here, that's his business. He's God.
We go to buy a car, we want it perfect.
Yeah, right. Why does anyone have anything? Yeah, it comes from God. Now, of course, again, God uses people, uses Ford Motor Company or whatever to make the things. Oh, can have it, but for whom is God especially governing the universe? We already did that too, the believers. So, I mean, the tsunami that kills 200,000 people, you can say, well, that's for the believers. Ooh, ouch. Kind of hard to think about. Well, there may have been a whole bunch of believers among them. We don't know. But again, for some reason, this fits into his plan of salvation for the most possible number of people. What is his purpose in doing this, of course? And that is to get us to heaven. So again, world wars, aerial wars, with airliners blowing up in the sky, crashing into the ocean, ships sinking, hurricanes destroying, cities, New Orleans, whatever, floods, Johnstown flood, famous flood back in 1800. Okay? That's all to get people to heaven. And I think if we continually think it that way, if we continually repeat that to ourselves, if we continually live in that truth, it changes our whole perspective. It changes how we watch the news. It changes how we read the paper. It changes how we live our lives. It changes everything about us if we just keep that in mind. It's hard to do, I will tell you that. I know plenty of believers who have a real hard time keeping that in their head. Really do. Rough time. Why do bad things happen to anyone at any time? And then good things do. Get people in. Get people in. Maybe to get them to heaven, or someone around them. Do humans have free will in their thoughts and actions? Why or why not? And I notice I put them a little separate. We're past time, but I just want to answer this question. We have free will in as much as we are believers. So as a believer in Jesus Christ, as a Christian, as a person on their way to heaven, we have a certain amount of, God gives us a certain amount of free will in how to choose to serve Him, how to choose when, where, how, through whom, what to do, and so on and so forth. We have free will. We can choose, believers can choose to take this path or that path. And God will work it out so that either one will accomplish His purpose. Why not? Humans do not have free will when they are unbelievers. As unbelievers, humans are incapable of doing anything except what Satan wants them to do. Now, true, God uses that too. In His permission, He uses that to accomplish His will. But it's still, they are not doing His will in their initial action. They are actually doing Satan's will. So they do not have free will. God does not give unbelievers free will to choose. What alone has perfect free will? Who alone has perfect free will at all times? And that is, of course, God Himself. He does exactly what He wants, exactly when He wants to do it, the way He wants to do it, every single solitary time, without any exception. Because that, my friends, is the definition of being God. And there's only one. Questions on it? Well, we got two out of three. Pick up that third one next time.